Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Parishscope, the podcast for our church, St. John's Lutheran Church, Sam Prairie. I'm Pastor Chris Sansom.
And I'm Casey Dreamus. I'm the contemporary music person.
And so welcome to our podcast, first-time listener, or maybe you've been following us for the last 9 episodes,
Wow.
I think, or 8.5, something like that. So
we're getting close to the 10 mark.
The 10 mark, that's how we know we made it.
Exactly. I think that's the number. I think we said that last week, or the other week, but I think that's the number that's like most people fail by 10. So
right before we get to anything, I'd like to comment that I actually noticed this when I first walked in, but I didn't. I wanted to make sure I waited.
Oh yeah.
You're wearing a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers shirt.
Well, of course, yeah.
Just to give everybody the scene here, we got a Mighty Morphin Power Rangers T-shirt.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And I the reason I partially bring that up is because I think the last time I brought it up, it wasn't a Power Rangers shirt, but like a pizza shirt. Is that right?
Yeah, I have a shirt that says like Mighty Morphin Pizza Rangers or something like that, and the lightning bolt on it is actually a pizza slice.
Yeah. And so I think I said something to you that night, and it turned out to be a pizza slice.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
I was like, oh no.
Yeah, no, I have lots of Power Rangers shirts. This one I actually got at Walmart when they had a movie come out in 2017, and you don't see a lot of Power Ranger shirts anymore.
No, you really don't.
They came out with this, and I bought 3 of them because they were like $7 each, and I was like, well. I'm gonna get as many as I can.
Right on.
If it happens again, I'm probably gonna buy like 10. I probably will.
I mean, it does make sense. Like, you see something that's a franchise that's not necessarily as popular as it once was.
That's right. Yeah, it's definitely not up there as Marvel and Star Wars is right now. So
we got Power Rangers in there. I haven't heard anything about Taylor Swift lately. I mean, we there for a while. We almost had a whole segment.
That's just true.
Dedicated to Taylor Swift, but now
there's been people who have commented, like, I've heard all the Taylor Swift stuff you talked about,
but I don't know anything new going on with Taylor Swift.
No, I don't know. I mean,
I just don't keep up with the news with her.
I think is her tour still going?
I think so. Isn't it the Eras tour or whatever it is? Yeah. Creating seismic activity everywhere she goes.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. I mean, quite a production. It's massive.
Yeah, it is. So I last it's been a couple weeks. I had a funeral in the family.
Yeah.
My great aunt Rosie Dorr passed away, and it was sad. She was 85 years old. A lot of people have been asking me that. So we kind of missed last week. I mean, I was actually around on Tuesday. The problem is I wasn't going to be around on Thursday and all that, and so I had to go into over crunch time and trying to get everything done.
A lot to do.
And so that was kind of the reasoning there.
Now I have a question.
Yeah.
About when you go to a funeral, especially if it's not one that you weren't is it officiating the right term?
Yeah, I think that's correct. Yeah.
Do you feel? I guess, or you probably don't do Do you ever do people get up and say something about the deceased, or not really?
I haven't been. I've been to several funerals. But in terms of the non-Lutheran camp, I've been to very few where they actually have people do that.
Oh, really?
I've been to a few, but not many. Many.
I just wondered if it's sort of like everybody in the family looks at you like, well, you're the pastor, get up there and say something inspiring or something about this. I just wonder if you have that pressure at all.
No, I don't. Although I will say this one time, not at a funeral at all, but one time I was visiting home. And this was I think I was still living in Wisconsin. And I was visiting home, and I came home to my home church, and my pastor got crazy ill that morning.
Yeah. And
so the elders actually came in on a rush, and they're like, oh, I just got back from pastor's house. He just can't do service today. He's like, and there's 2 of them sitting on the front, and they both had the deer in the headlights look. Because, they were realizing that they were going to have to do the sermon and the prayers and everything. And then I walked in.
Like, hey,
actually,
Chris.
I shouldn't say that. I was actually already in there. I was with my mom and everything. And then they looked over, and they're like, oh, hey, Chris. And then then they took a second, and it was almost like a cartoon. Then they kind of looked back at me, and they're like, you're a pastor, right? Yes.
Yeah.
So here's the story. Okay.
So you got roped into doing another one, even on your off day.
Yeah. But I've never had that happen on a funeral per se, though.
Yeah,
so.
I just wondered.
It's It's a good question.
Yeah.
I had one of my professors back in the day warned us that, don't, if you ever go to like a family funeral or something like that, don't ever wear a clergy shirt, a clerical collar. Because he said you will get called up. Some of these were like, oh yeah, you need to come up and talk about, It's like,
oh yeah.
so just don't wear a clerical collar and you're good.
Yeah, it's always it's always interesting because do you now? I wasn't even planning on talking about this, but see when my grandparents, my mom's parents were both Lutheran, Missouri Synod, and all that, but the pastor they had. They did not do any sort of, does anybody want to say anything? That was at least it seemed to me at the time that was a very you don't do that in funerals. Yeah. Is that kind of thing? Or is that more?
Okay, so you get that request some of the times. And usually the way I do it is, and this is one part theological and one part just pragmatic or practical.
Yeah.
And that is that you either push it to the beginning of the service or the end of the service. And I usually say do it at the beginning of service. And the reason for that is part theologically, once that service starts, really, kind of as that overseer presence, I want to make sure that everything that's taking place in that service is in good theological order. Mm-hmm. It's almost like as a pastor, I'm saying everything that you see from this, like bookends, almost like everything you see in between here is good. Mm-hmm. And if I put my stamp of approval on it, I, of course, want it to be good. Now, that being said, what I have found is that pushing it to the beginning actually makes sense on a very practical level as well. Mm-hmm. And this actually really does make a lot of sense. And that is to say that a lot of times, especially with funerals, man, once that first hymn starts, the emotions flow, right. And you do not know how you're going to be emotionally. Mm-hmm. And so there's been a couple times where people have said, hey, can I say this? And I said, yeah, well, let me read it beforehand. And I do, and all that kind of stuff. And then they want to say it at a certain point of the service. And as long as I've read through it, it's fine. But then what happens is they get emotional and they just break down and, they can't make it through even their speech.
Oh, yeah. No, that's
so I always tell people, just don't even worry about it. Just if you want to say something, just do it right before we start the service. I say once we start the service, I'll kind of control things until the end.
Yeah.
I said you can do it at the end too, but I wouldn't. From an emotional standpoint, it's just hard. And so that's generally speaking the way I tend to approach it. Basically, if it's in the service, I'm kind of technically the overseer, and I'm overseeing that. I'm saying this is from a theological standpoint, this is good, and so I like to have some kind of control over that.
Okay, that's interesting. I just wondered. That's an interesting one because, I don't know. I always wondered that because my grandparents on that side who were Lutheran, that was like their pastors or whoever they had were very no, we don't do that. Yeah. Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So interesting. I have to tell you, just since we're on the subject, because when my now this is the other side of my family. When my grandpa passed away, we did the same thing where anybody want to come up, and I felt like I went up. And I told the story about he used to own a meat market in town. So I told the story about how I met someone who was the business over from him. Yeah, and they're like, "You're related to Dave Doremus?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I go, and as I went to flinch, so they didn't hit me in the head or whatever, jokingly, and then but they're like, "Oh, I love Dave." So I made this whole thing about how cool it was to grow up in the same town and have my grandfather was someone that people really respected, and Doremus is a name that people actually tend to like when they meet someone with that name. Yeah. Anyway. So I get done. Everybody was kind of I felt good. People are kind of smiling and tearing up a little bit, but it was all perfect. My cousin goes up and she goes, "Well, Christmas is going to be different." And then she sat down, and that was it. And I just thought, man, way to bring it down. I thought I had us going so good. Anyway, that's just a little side story. But anyway, on I guess we have to get to our segments. But
we actually have to get to the actual show here.
Yeah.
That's
probably our record for longest intro.
That is. It's a huge intro. So our first segment does deal with current events, and one of the things I like to say is I don't mind handling politics and stuff like that, but every now and again a story comes through and it gets some people talking, and it's a story that a lot of other people don't talk about. And so there's a story that a lot of pastors I've noticed have started talking about in recent days. And the story is called Departure, Why I Left the Church.
Oh, okay.
Now, the story is about a man named Reverend Alexander Lang. He is a pastor, or I should say was a pastor at First Presbyterian Church of Arlington Heights. And recently, he has decided to step down from the pastorate.
Okay.
And he kind of gives this laundry list of reasons. Now the interesting thing about this is when you read this article, and he wrote this big blog post, and that was the title of it, Departure, Why I Left the Church. At first, when you're starting to read through it, you can really, if you're a pastor or if you're in the church, you can really kind of resonate with a lot of the things he talks about a lot of things that are stressors in general, and a lot of people in ministry feel the same way. And so he has a lot of things that really, really resonate. And so at first, the article is being pushed everywhere. Now, again, I say everywhere, but realize I have a lot of friends that are pastors. I mean,
of course. Yeah.
My graduating class was 139. The class that was before me was 140. So, I mean, assuming that most of them are somewhat connected still in the ministry, I have upwards of 200 or 300 pastor friends.
Yeah. That's more than me, I'll say.
And that's more than most. And so you get an article like this, and it just starts getting posted everywhere.
Right.
And then all of a sudden come the rebuttals.
Oh, of course.
The why I stayed in the church, or all this kind of stuff. And one man by the name of Hans Feeney. Now Hans Feeney he's LCMS famous.
Okay.
So he's LCMS famous. Although you probably don't know his name, you may have seen Lutheran Satire. And there's some cartoons and some other stuff that he's made over the years. He pokes fun at stuff, and a lot of it is really well done and just funny. And he's got kind of a good sense of humor, but he's also just kind of known in circles. He's typically well written, fairly conservative. His grandfather's a man by the name of J.A.O. Preuss. Now, that name probably means nothing to you, Casey.
Nothing.
However, if you were raised in the LCMS church and know our famous theologians, that name is of significance.
Oh, okay.
So that's his grandfather.
LCMS famous.
Yeah, his grandfather's LCMS famous. He's LCMS famous, though, for completely other reasons.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But he kind of wrote his rebuttal, why I stayed in the church. But I've also noticed, even the Christian Post, other big names in terms of Christian news out there have started to write also why I stayed in the church and various rebuttals to this man because again, this thing just exploded.
Right.
And it's something that exploded in the dare I say, the pastoral world, but probably nowhere else.
Right. Yeah.
But it has, given a lot of people pause to take notice. And part of the reason that I think he's taking a lot of people are taking notice is because this man, when he writes this, again, like I said, at first when you start reading it, he talks about the long hours and the counseling. One of the things that he brings into it is you get to personally know 200, 300 people, and you carry some of that weight with you. And he's not wrong. Sometimes you really do. And then he also talks about the way, you can get spurned in a church. And that's also true. I think a lot of people do these things where they're very, very well intentioned, but it ends up being, especially when you're on the other side of it, kind of perceived a little bit differently. And I think some of it comes down to sometimes you get people that are very consumeristic in their styling with the church. And what they do is they end up treating the church very consumeristic. And that can, unfortunately, the church, though, isn't really a consumeristic person. It's a very, very personal thing.
Right.
And
now, can I ask you, when you, just to give a more definition of what do you, an example of what do you mean by consumeristic?
Yeah. Excuse me. No, what I mean by consumeristic is it's they can remain anonymous and the church is just a product.
Okay. Yeah.
So So again, if you view church as just something that you go to on Sunday mornings and you're just a product, but the church is just a product. Is this something there to fulfill some random need that you happen to have?
Right.
Like you are viewing the church as a consumer, as a consumeristic. It's part of the reason that, like having a praise band is awesome, but not having the greatest praise band on the face of the planet shouldn't necessarily impact your church attendance.
Yeah, yeah.
Because if you're going after only the quality of the praise band, well, that's not very personal. That's a concert. That's a consumer.
Right.
That's what your driving force is.
Yeah.
But if on the other hand you're saying, this is my church home, and hey, they have a praise band, they have contemporary music, and I think this is awesome, and that's wonderful, and you like those things, more power to you. That's fantastic. But if you're only looking at it gauging by how good that praise band is or isn't.
Right.
And if you're willing to jump ship of a church and go to one that is completely theologically different, it's one thing when you're like two LCMS churches and you're like, well, that one has a better praise band. Okay, whatever.
Yeah, I get that.
But if you're like, well, here's the Lutheran and that one over there is some wackadoo religion, but their praise band's better.
Yeah.
If that's, if you just don't even care about theology, you only care, that's kind of a consumer-driven standpoint.
Yeah, I understand.
And so what happens is I think a lot of people, again, well-meaning people, probably nice people, great people, what they do is people ultimately through time make these connections with them, but then if they view the church more consumeristic, they view it almost like a Walmart, whereas, I like this one over here, I'll just go over here. And then all of a sudden you have these relationships that are all broken, and people feel that. Yeah. And pastors feel that too. Whenever somebody leaves a church and they just don't tell you why, and you're just left wondering, like, did I do something wrong? Did I hurt their, again, in this article, he kind of goes into all of these things. But one of the other things that he kind of also does is he talks about how, he really pushed hard to innovate the church and get rid of some of these old traditions and try to do this and so it's a unique thing in that on the one hand, a lot of the struggles that he's talking about make a lot of sense. On the other hand, he also seems to omit Jesus. And that's one of the things that a lot of these rebuttals are starting to point out. There's a lot of stress that goes with my job as a pastor. That's very true. Any ministry, anybody who's involved in ministry has certain stressors. But if I, as a pastor, am not bringing my own baggage to Jesus, then that means it's going to stick with me. And if it's sticking with me, guess what? I can't do it. And that's kind of one of the things that a lot of people are commenting on this article. And I think that's probably very fitting.
Would it be, now this might be a stretch, I'm a metaphor person, so I like metaphors, but in some way, could you almost relate it to, like, there's always the joke about, like, the guy who is, like, a painter, and then you go to his house, and it's atrocious, and it's like, man, why didn't you paint your house? It's like, well, I do that all day,
Yeah.
And so, like, why, they don't want to paint their own house because they do that as a job all day. But with a pastor, it's kind of, if you spend every day working on everybody else, their relationship with God, but you go home and just go like, I just need to like not focus on God for a while and just relax. I mean, is that kind of maybe sort of the like maybe what people are trying to say about it? It's like,
well, I think I don't even think it's that far, because I think what's happening is a lot of these people are commenting, because even if you go to this guy's page, I guess, and listen to some of his sermons seem very self-helpish.
Oh, okay,
but very little in terms of Jesus. And your relationship with him. And so it seems like, again, you can resonate with a lot of the stressors he's talking about. Because, again, a lot of, again, if you're in church work for any length of time, you're dealing with people. And, again, sometimes these things happen. And, it stinks when they do,
Yeah. I can understand that, yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, this guy's like, I'm leaving the church over this. And he's like, I've been doing this for, I think he said like 10 or 12 years. Like, well, I've been a pastor for 15. So it's like, it's like, yeah, but if you're not, look, if you're a pastor and your prayer life is junk, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Now, look, I'm not saying you have to be a prayer superstar. Obviously, we hope you are. Obviously, but there are certain disciplines and practices. And I'll be honest, look, sometimes I would qualify myself as a prayer superstar, but then there's other times, you know, when I kind of look at myself and go, man, I need my own discipline. I need, you know. So I don't want to sit here and say, oh, yeah, you got to be a prayer superstar. But I mean, if you're just not doing that at all, if you write a whole article about why you left the church and you never once mention Jesus, and then your sermons, you don't really talk about Jesus, and and again, I think this rightfully so. And so, you got, but anyway, just in case anybody's actually seen it, this article is all over the place.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's several articles. And the part of the reason I also wanted to bring this up is because I do know some people get Christian News or Christian Post or some of these other news sources. My guess is within this next month's issue, you're going to see an article dealing with this.
Right, yeah.
Now, some of that's going to come about because October is called Pastor's Appreciation Month. Why October, I don't know, but it is. That's what they claimed it, I guess.
October,
but part, yeah, that's right.
They're just like it works well. They'll get to have a good time.
Yeah. That's what it is. By the way, we did miss a day, though. September 9th is National Buy Your Priest a Beer Day. Now, I'm not a priest.
Darn it.
I'm not a priest, but I am a pastor, and I'm just missed a holiday. Anyway.
I'll take that holiday. That holiday's okay. We're okay with that one, yeah.
But that's going to be some of the reasons. But my guess is that this article really hit a nerve with some people, and I would say though, pastoral burnout, and I think we've talked about this in the past. It is a growing thing, and so it is something to watch and pay attention to. But again, just kind of bringing this article to the forefront because this one is really resonating with a lot of people. But as much as I think he says a lot of things that are correct and obviously things that we need to talk about and address, he also kind of avoids Jesus, and that's a problem. Again, that's just going to be a problem for me. And I just, any pastor that can't talk about Jesus is a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think we've, to tie it in sort of with people who aren't pastors, it's like we've talked about this before where somebody who goes to church and let's say they had a really bad pastor, they had a really bad elder, or someone who just was very off-putting and negative and really turned them to the point where they're like, religion's religion's stupid and I'm not going to follow that, where those people, they're not Jesus. But, so when you're mad at them and that means you're going to completely denounce your faith, that's really, we've talked about that before, where you're missing the point. That's not what you're not supposed to have your faith in those people. It's supposed to be in God,
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this pastor kind of emphasized that point, really.
Yeah.
But it is kind of the new buzzworthy news that's going on right now, and especially in terms of the Christian world that again a lot of people kind of miss out on. And I wouldn't be surprised if you see it in a lot of various Christian journals that are going to be coming out over the next several weeks to a month. All right, it's time for our newest segment. What do we call it? It's not Stump the Pastor.
We don't really have a name for it.
We don't have a name for it.
It's like Stump the Pastor / there's no dumb questions.
There's no dumb questions. That's what it is.
That's why
I was looking for it.
Yeah. But okay, so here's my question. You're probably gonna. I feel like this is one you're gonna laugh at because you'll be like, probably have heard this one before. But why are there so many prayers all next to each other? That's my main question. Because you guys do a lot of, I shouldn't say you guys, I should say we. Use guys. There's a lot of a prayer, and then you say amen, and then you start into the next prayer, and then there's another amen. And I'm
okay.
And I gotta be honest. There's also, I should ask another side question is there's a certain point, which now I'm not going to remember the name of it. I think it's at the beginning. Oh shoot, I'm not remembering what it is.
At the beginning of service.
At the beginning of service, and I feel like I don't know whether or not you're supposed to have your eyes closed or you're supposed to have your eyes open for it. And sometimes I look around and I feel like I see some people with their eyes open, some people are still, their heads are bowed, like they're still in prayer. And I don't know if we're supposed to be, I don't know. I can't.
Are you talking about the confession absolution?
I think so. Yeah.
Or are you talking about the collect of the day?
Which one does collect of the day come after that?
It's the
absolution?
Invocation, and then it's
Okay.
the confession absolution. The confession is usually a prayer. The absolution is the proclamation of the forgiveness of sins.
Mm-hmm.
And then the collect of the day is a prayer that is usually said after that sometimes.
Okay. So is it? Are you just your eyes are closed the whole time during all that?
No.
No. Okay.
No,
See,
not
that's what
necessarily.
I feel like some people that once they got their eyes closed, it's just like let's just keep them. Let's just keep bowed
them
until
closed.
like they tell us to sit down or whatever.
But I mean, this is actually a really good question because what you're breaking into is a topic known as, believe it or not, it's actually got a name. Everything has names.
Yeah.
It's called the rubrics.
Okay.
The rubrics is basically the word rubric is Latin and it means red, our red letters. And we're not talking about the words of Jesus in a Bible, but what we're talking about is the old printed text. And the old printed text, it always had the instructions in terms of what you're supposed to do next, the actual physical actions.
Yeah.
It would always put those in red letters
Okay.
so that you knew black or, whether it was bolded font or lighter font, but the black ink was what you were to say and the red ink was what you are to do. Hence,
Okay.
rubrics are what you are to do.
Okay.
And so that's what you're getting into. What are the rubrics? What are we supposed to do?
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's a very good question. So for instance, here's one for you. Like we do the invocation. Now, invocation it comes from, again, Latin. We love Latin, by the way.
Yes.
In case you didn't know, we love Latin. Latin gives us fancy words and it makes us sound good. But basically what it is it is us invoking or calling upon the name of our God. We're basically saying, hey, we're starting the service or we're participating in this service and this is who we're worshiping. We're laying it out front right at the beginning. And it's really important to do that. And I always say, like in a world where nobody wants to be offensive, I always say the invocation should offend.
Okay.
If you are not truly Christian, that is Trinitarian Christian, the invocation should offend you because we are already saying we're worshiping three gods in one. We're beginning in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, but yet there's one God, right? Amen.
Yeah.
But we're invoking the name of God. We're saying, look, this is who we're worshiping, and if you don't worship that God, then this is not your service.
Okay, interesting.
So it's kind of a call out right at the beginning, and then we say, well, do I make the sign of the cross upon myself as a pastor, i.e., do I face the altar and I make the sign of the cross on myself, or do I say it more like a blessing and I make the sign of the cross over the congregation, the people?
Yeah, okay.
There's two different sides to this argument. Some people believe that the pastor is acting and functioning as a part of the congregation when he calls that out, and some people say no, he is leading them and invoking the name, and therefore he should say it more like a blessing. I tend to fall on the side where I act more as one of the people. So, but what's fascinating with that is you also try to capture the culture of the church.
Okay,
And so, believe it or not, I will actually do both.
Yeah,
depending, not depending on too much, but like basically just in terms of what I'm doing, and basically how I'm standing there and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of times, especially in late service, I will actually face the congregation. Whereas in the early service, I almost always face the altar.
Interesting.
But sometimes I face the altar even in the late service. So,
but like you said, there's kind of an argument for both.
Yeah, there is a little bit of an argument.
That's interesting. Yeah.
But the sign of the cross is made to remember your baptism.
Oh, okay.
It's not.
I
there.
never see.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. When you're baptized, you get marked with the sign of the cross on your forehead and upon your heart. And the whole thing is to mark you as one redeemed by Christ crucified. And so the idea is that like you're going to kind of redo that cross, but you're redoing it. And so you make the sign of the cross. Now, some people, when it comes to the hands on the side, do you go left to right or right to left? And there's this big argument because the Catholics do it one way and the Lutherans,
really?
I don't really care.
Okay.
Just do it, right? Make the sign of the cross. In fact, if you go to Luther's Small Catechism, it's really fascinating. He says when you wake up in the morning, make the sign of the cross.
Oh,
and I think that's really fascinating, really good, but that's not what we're talking about today. Maybe next time.
Yeah.
Write it down.
You say catechism?
I'm so bossy.
You always have me spelling words that there's no way I could ever spell it. Catechism.
Yeah. Just put making the sign of the cross.
Yeah.
I am so bossy.
Latin, but I can, because music, we will use Latin terms.
Yeah.
And I actually watched a masterclass of Hans Zimmer who said,
oh, yeah.
Stop doing that. He's like, when you write music, just write build.
Yeah.
Instead of crescendo. Because it's like no one knows what a crescendo is. Well, I mean,
yeah, well, good luck getting
it.
us Lutherans to change.
Yeah, I know.
We're never changing.
We're not as progressive as Hans Zimmer.
Yeah, right, right.
Anyway, sorry.
As I boss you around and be like, write this.
Write that.
I'm going to get comments later this week. You're so rude, Pastor Chris. Oh, my gosh. But
see, I had no idea that was to symbolize your baptism. I did not know that.
Yeah.
See, should everybody know that? Or is that kind of like, I mean, yeah, everybody should, but probably most people don't.
I mean, it's in the hymnal. We sometimes, depending on our space issue, we sometimes put it in the bulletins, but it's like a little sub note that everybody kind of glosses over.
Interesting.
But yeah, so I mean, it's as a sign of your baptism. And again, Luther says, wake up in the morning, make the sign of the cross. One of the best sermons of all time was preached on that. But again, different topic, different day.
All right, different day.
Then, with confession and absolution. Now, confession and absolution done toward the beginning of the service. Usually, I'm acting more or less as a member of the congregation. I turn, I face the altar. A lot of times, if you have a kneeler, you can kneel. You don't have to, but you can. But you're leading the congregation in the confession of sins. Now, there's a couple different ways. You can do this through a prayer. You can do this through a written kind of thing. And you'll notice in the hymn books we have this like kind of rote speech that we kind of have that kind of hammers it all down. But ultimately, whichever way you do it, the point is that you are taking that moment to confess your sins to God as best as you can. Now, I mean, it's not like a full-on confession. It's not like we're going to sit there for 2 hours and say, okay,
yeah,
And this is a good point too. Like if you ever, I mean, this is great and it works great for corporate confession absolution. But like, if you find yourself going, well, that corporate confession absolution doesn't work for me. And that does happen. Like some people have done something in their life and they have trouble forgiving themselves.
Yeah.
And really that's a good job for your pastor, right? Whether that's me or someone else, like go to your pastor, develop a session. And this is where, things like private confession absolution take place. And everybody goes, well, we did away with that. That was a Catholic thing. Well, no, it wasn't. And we didn't necessarily do away with it. We added corporate confession absolution, but we've always maintained private confession absolution. You can make an appointment with your pastor at any point in time and, confess a sin to him, and he will give you absolution. Now, the reason this is important is because sometimes when you're in a crowd, when you're anonymous, you can kind of say, well, if he really knew what my sin was, there's no way that God would forgive it. Well, that's why you make an appointment, because then you can tell your sin. And guess what? Your pastor is there, and he'll be like, yep, Christ covered that one too.
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. Let's talk about the ins and outs. But yeah, even as horrendous as you think that is, God covered that too.
Yeah.
And so you can talk about that.
So book an appointment today. All right.
So book an appointment today. But yeah. So so you confess your sins. You take a moment of confession, and then after that, the words of absolution are proclaimed. Now, at this point in time, as a pastor, I would turn around, and that turn is actually important. In fact, if you ever pay attention, and I always tell the kids, like the youth in my confirmation, you should just pay attention, because that turn actually, in its own right, is a symbol. Oh. Because it's like this: the pastor functions like a pivot point. That is to say, he's either acting as a member of the congregation and the voice of the congregation, kind of speaking for the church, or he flips around and he is basically acting as the mouthpiece of God.
Gotcha.
And so he flips back and forth. And so you can actually see what he's doing and who he's addressing it to based on where he's flipping.
Oh,
now, sometimes I get that wrong, but anyway. But like, yeah, so like the invocation, that's why it's important which way do you flip. And that's why there's this big debate over like, should I do this? Should I do this?
Right, okay.
You know, but confession is very obvious. With confession, I turn and face the altar. But then when absolution comes, I flip around. I look at the congregation, and what do I say? I proclaim the words of God. Now, during the absolution, you do not have to have your eyes closed. You can look up because that is a message from God to you, right? Mm-hmm. That God has had mercy. He has forgiven you of your sins. And as a called and ordained servant of Christ, I therefore forgive you all of your sins. You know, and I kind of go through that whole thing. Like, that's what it's all about. It's all about that proclamation of forgiveness given and shed for you. You can't, do you have to open your eyes? Well, I'm not going to go out there and make you open your eyes, but can you? Yeah, absolutely.
That's the part though that I always kind of, I feel like, are we supposed to, everybody, it looks like a lot of people have their eyes closed, but some don't. And
you can very much open your eyes. But there are some people in a state of humility, because remember, a lot of them are still, a lot of people I think truly do ponder on their sins, and it's in that moment, look, anytime you've done something wrong and you kind of hold your head and you kind of come forward, like even when the person is saying, yeah, don't worry, we're good, you don't like jump up and down and hold your head up. You know, you're kind of like, you sure? And I think some people, it's the same thing. Some people still consider it like a part of that prayer. I don't necessarily think there's a wrong rubric there, but at the same time, it's like, is it appropriate to open your eyes? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because again, you have another point where, again, the Trinitarian invocation is mentioned. The sign of the cross is done, in remembrance of your baptism. But then after that, you'll notice I turn right back around, especially on Communion Sundays, because then I say the collect of the day. Now, a collect is an interesting word, and again, it's Latin, but it just means to collect. The idea is that we're going to have a prayer that summarizes prayers. We're taking the prayers of the people,
okay,
and we're collecting them all together in one short, summarized prayer. And that's what the collect of the day is. It's usually a prayer. From the history standpoint, it is usually a prayer that has been passed down to us, whether it be 20 years, 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years. It's in kind of this rotation. A lot of them will end up on that exact day. And like, this is just the prayer that you have for this day.
Right.
But it's still a collect. And it's still, again, this is why I love it. Like, you're experiencing the church 2,000 years all at once. Like, right? It's still your prayer. And it's still my prayer, and it's still the prayer that we're like experiencing together, and we're still saying the same thing, even after all this time. We're still kind of saying and praying the same thing. Interesting. Now, to kind of further address your question, because I know you care,
I do. This
he does.
I think I have learned more things in the last 20 minutes, just like and not like little things that I didn't know the hand movement was for the Baptist. I didn't know which way you face was representing leading or what, Yeah, that's interesting.
But so now with the service of Matins, or a service of prayer and preaching, this really interesting thing happens. And it's just the way the services are designed to be. They, instead of having one long set of prayers, what they do is they have it broken up into a series of collects. That is to say, a series of collected, summarized prayers. And so on a Matin service, and you guys will, and I think the congregation itself notices this sometimes, like, so on one time we'll have these prayers that are more in the congregational response, and the prayer itself is really consistent. Like, the congregational response is important. It's a theme. It's a plea. And if I'm really blunt, it also keeps us all awake so we don't fall asleep. So we have these longer prayers, but they have kind of these responses that kind of go back and forth. And so it's kind of like this movement that kind of goes back and forth with the church. And so that's really awesome. But on Matin Sundays, we actually have a series of collects, which is why we say the Lord's Prayer first, and then we have this year, and the collects always end with an amen. You know, the congregational response is an amen, because that's the end of the prayer.
Yeah.
But then we have another one.
Exactly.
And then we have another one. And then we have another one.
Yeah.
And so it's like a series of those collective prayers. But, and I always say this, like these services, Matins, Vespers, Compline, those are called the daily offices because they are meant to be done literally every day. And they are meant to be very reflective, and they're not meant to necessarily be rushed.
Yeah, okay.
So now again, I mean, I'll be honest, on a Sunday morning, on a typical Sunday morning, it is probably what a lot of people in the ancient world would have considered rushed.
Yeah, right.
Our services feel that way. But to be honest, like, so for instance, imagine I added a 10-second pause at the end of each prayer.
Yeah.
We might have some people getting up to leave. Like what's going on here?
Yeah.
You know, but the reality is that, like, you know, there is this element of just slow down, reflect, you know, here's what you just prayed, you know, and there is this very slow movement that could kind of be carried out. And, you know, that could be done in the morning, afternoon. My favorite is Compline. Compline has these long, drawn-out pauses that you can use even in between services. It just gives you really a lot of time to just sit there and really dwell on it. But that's why you can have several prayers back to back. It's not a continual prayer. It is, you do get a moment to reflect.
Have you ever gotten someone who texts you and it's like, hey, how's it going? Hey, I got something I want to talk to you about.
Yes.
What are you doing tomorrow? I had an idea. It's like when they send you like 8 text messages where like you can just do it in one text. You can just say one text. That's I just always think of that like as in a joking way. I know that's not what's really happening, but just got up there like, all right, okay, another prayer. Okay, all right, guys, you can just do one prayer. You can just do one big massive prayer. That's okay. You don't have to send me 8 messages. Just send me one.
Yeah.
I know that's not what he's really thinking, but that's I just think.
I really do get your point, and I understand what you're saying. I'm just saying, like, I think one of the things that we've lost in the modern day is this idea of reflection. We just don't. Yeah. We just don't do it anymore. And the ancient world was much better at it, and they designed their services with that in mind.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we're seeing with our services is like this kind of almost forced reflection that we're not used to.
Yeah.
And it's almost uncomfortable. It's like, I don't know if I like that.
Well, they didn't have HBO back then. They didn't have stuff to go watch, you know.
They didn't know that the game wasn't coming on
football,
in 325.
Yeah, we got to get to the football game. Or watch the game. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny because we really, reflecting is very, like you said, pretty much lost. And it's to a point, like I do a lot of videos, and there's something called a J-hook edit, which I don't know if you've ever heard of a J-hook edit. But what the J-hook edit is that you take, at the end of your clip, you take the next clip, and depending on how much time is kind of like, if I say a word like, so we're on our way, I would clip the next clip so that when I say on my way, as soon as like I hit that point, the next, my next clip would start the audio to the next word. So literally it's like, you don't really notice, but I'm like, in the videos, it's talking over itself constantly.
Oh, okay.
Because when one word is ending and they kind of draw out that word, the next sentence is starting already.
Yeah.
And then it cuts to the next clip, but your brain really doesn't conceive that started before the clip came.
Huh.
And it keeps you like watching because it just never stops. And so we're just in that point where, like, the attention span, it's all about, can you keep people watching, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm sure by, like you said, by standards back 2,000 years ago or whenever, you know, they're probably like, man, these people are flying through this. You know?
Yeah. We're a very fast-paced society as a whole.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That was good. Yeah.
That was all right. Yeah, let's keep going down the commandment rabbit hole. I think we've done the first commandment, second commandment. We could do the third commandment. That's what we're going to get. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. Now, this is always an interesting one to talk about because if you can recall, in the Old Testament, the Sabbath day was a day of rest, but it was also the seventh day, which is Saturday. not
Right.
Sunday, Saturday. And
We got too much to do on Saturday.
we're just too busy. No, it actually goes all the way back to the book of Acts, and also some parts of John. The book of Revelation talks about this as well. They call it the Lord's Day, and it's always really fascinating to me. A lot of people don't realize this, but like there is a certain theology that permeates a lot of the Old Testament and into the New Testament. And it's this idea that God is creating again. So let me explain that. So God creates days 1 through 6, and then on the seventh day he rests.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the story stops. Except there's an eighth day, right? There's a day when he starts working again. He starts creating again. And so one of the things that you see scattered throughout the Bible is this idea of God's at work. God's at work. He's doing stuff. And it's on the eighth day. And so when it says that Jesus rose on the first day of the week, usually we think, okay, it's just the first day of the week. But what you need to realize is like, that's the eighth day.
Mm-hmm.
So if a week is 7 days long, the eighth day is the first day of the week. It's the first day of an old week, but to a new week, it's in the eighth day.
Yeah.
Circumcision in the Old Testament was done on the eighth day.
Ugh.
You know, a child was 8 days old when they were circumcised. Why? Because it was a new covenant. It was something new that God was doing. He was creating. By the way,
highly recommend.
Highly recommend. No, in the ancient world, one of the first debates that the church actually got into, recorded debates. You know, of course, we have the Jerusalem Council that's talked about in the book of Acts and all that kind of stuff. But like, if you look at some of the polemic, the fighting, the writing that was done more in a polemical or fighting style, it was this fight against one guy by the name of Tertullian and another couple guys, and they were basically all fighting back and forth over when you should baptize a child. Now, it's really fascinating because I think a lot of our modern day ears would probably go, well, you know, when the kid can make a choice or when this and when that. The reality is that wasn't even on the table. Like, Tertullian, the one I mentioned, was actually the only guy who even thought kids should get what he called to an age of accountability, which was not 13, but 3. He thought that was about 3 years old. So he thought
accountability, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
The rest of the fight, though, was really on whether or not you should baptize a child the second they're born, or if you should wait exactly 8 days. Because again, what is baptism except for it's this idea of God's creating. Like God's at work again. He's creating a new creation inside of us. Paul calls it a new creation. Paul also says in Romans 6, you know, we're buried with Christ, we're dead with Christ, so that we can have new life with Christ. And so it's this idea that God is creating this new life inside of us, this newness inside of us. And so it's the eighth day. And so we, with the resurrection of Christ, we moved, you know, basically the Sabbath day in essence. It kind of got adjusted, and the early church kind of did it on the first day of the week, the eighth day.
Yeah.
As opposed to the Saturday. Now, that being said, you know, it's always really interesting. Like, there's this idea that, you know, you remember the Sabbath day and keeping it holy. And there's a lot of different aspects of things that kind of go into this. So, for instance, I didn't realize this, but like, so you're going to be awake most of the time, approximately 16 hours, right? 8 hours for sleeping, roughly.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you're going to be awake for 16 hours in one day. Now, if you took all the hours of a week, sleeping and awake, and you basically took 10% of that, a tithe, you'd have 16 hours. So, if you want to tithe your time, you give 1 day a week.
Okay.
Not one church service, by the way. Not one, you know, just go to Sunday school and church. No, 1 day.
Yeah.
And in the Old Testament, you know, this is pretty serious stuff. Like, God says, like, hey, if you guys can't do this, you know, get thrown out.
Yeah.
Like, they weren't allowed to do anything. Like, and that was not just the Jews in the ancient world or the Pharisees overdoing it. Like, read through Exodus. Like, no, you didn't make a fire. You didn't do anything. Like you know, this was a day that you did not spend working, but you spent it to the Lord. Now the Pharisees kind of overdid that a bit.
Yeah.
They turned it into something completely different. They turned it into this thing where like they had it narrowed down to exactly how many steps you could take and whether or not you could go to the bathroom. And it was like they had all kinds of rules and regulations that went along with this that were not biblical at all.
Yeah.
But if you just maintain the practice of just saying, hey, I'm going to take a day and I'm going to give it to the Lord and I'm going to spend my time reading his word. I'm going to spend my time, in his house, all that kind of stuff. That was what that was all about. Nowadays, we kind of look at it almost like, again, like it's a Sunday school and church thing.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess on the one hand, that's better than nothing. But at the same time, it's like, I guess I'd say I challenge all of the families here, take a day, like just really take a day. And I'll actually give you another example too. When I was in seminary, we're assigned these churches to work with. We had a fieldwork church, like that was a church that we regularly went, but we also had these modules that they were called that we had to take. And one of the modules was to work with a very specific church that had a specific mission model. The one that I worked with, one of them that I worked with was called Kaiv Shalom. And it was a church that was a bunch of Jewish converts. And if you've been in my Bible study at all, you've heard this story a billion times. But like for those of you that haven't, this is all new. But it was always really interesting. So the first time I had to go there like 4 weeks in a row or 4 weeks or something like that. So the first week I went there. Now I'm a seminary student, and I got my normal, okay. So I look it up online. They have like Bible study at like 8:30. They have like a church service at 9:30. So I'm like, okay, I show up at like 8:15 or something. I forget what it is, but it's something like that. I get there. They are nowhere near ready for anything Bible study related. They're still setting stuff up and they're still moseying around and finally they get to Bible study and I'm like looking at the clock. I'm like, oh my gosh, we got like 10 minutes for Bible study.
Yeah.
Oh no. They took their hour, if not then some. And then finally after a while, they're just kind of like, well, I guess we should start church now. And, that's what they did. They got set up for church and they asked me to help do something and I was helping and I was like, okay. It hit about noon, 12:30. Now remember, this was like Bible study is supposed to go to 9:30 and then church service only lasts an hour, right? So 10:30, I should be out the door.
Right.
No, it's noon. It's noon and I'm still there. And church is finally over and they all look at me and they're like, well, are you going to come down for lunch? Like we're going to, and I was like, no, I can't. I was like, I got homework. I was like, I got work to do it. But I made sure to take note of that. And I took note. And so the next week, or maybe it was 2 weeks later, I can't remember. I was like, I'm going to take the time to do this right.
Yeah.
I didn't get home till 9 o'clock at night.
Oh my gosh.
Didn't get home till 9 o'clock at night.
They're just there all day?
Well, first we were there. And then we went down for lunch, and then we hung out a little bit for lunch. And then after that, everybody was invited to this one gal's house, but I didn't go to that. But then they decided another group went across the street, and there was like this bar restaurant thing. And we probably stayed there till dinner time. And then we came back over, and I think we had another like short service. I'm trying to remember exactly how it was. But like, yeah, we had like the short service before we all left. Like we were there. I was there till like
all day.
It was like till like maybe it wasn't 9 o'clock. Maybe I'm misremembering, but it was late.
Yeah.
It was pretty much dark by the time I left. But one of the things I began to realize is like all these guys were Jewish converts, or at least most of them were. And, in Judaism, you take Sabbath very, very seriously.
Yeah.
And one of the things that it revealed to me was how not so seriously we take it.
Yeah. Yeah.
These people, this is what they did all day long. Like they went to church and like, that was just it. Like they were going to be at church all day. Like that, there was no other plans for the day.
Yeah.
And whenever they ate lunch, by the way, they were not cooking anything. They got out like chicken and stuff from the fridge. Like that was it. Like,
yeah.
And so it was but it was a really nice experience. And I wish I could say I stuck up with that kind of a practice, but I haven't, and it's but I still definitely try to take time on Sundays to really kind of take that moment to really reflect and just really relax and kind of do that. But yeah, it was just a very interesting thing. Like, it was like, yeah, they're going to hang out with their church family, and like that's just all they're going to do, all day long.
Yeah.
I think if I tried that, I'd oh man, I think I'd be hanging out by myself anyway.
Yeah. Oh, that's wow, man.
But again,
crazy.
it just kind of reflects like this idea that God calls on us to remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. That's a full 16-hour day. That's a waking day. For us to set that aside and say, God, this is your day. I'm going to go to worship. I'm going to hear your word. I'm going to receive your gifts and sing your praises. And I'm going to be with my church family in one way or the other. Now that still might translate to being at home and raising your kids in the faith. That's also true.
Right, yeah.
Right? There's nothing wrong with, instead of saying, okay, I'm going to hang out at church, going home and, I know some people like watch football and stuff like that, but, just keeping God a part of your day throughout the whole day, just really taking the time and the effort. I know one lady up north who's since been sainted, fabulous lady, but she always used to tell me that she'd make chip dip every Sunday.
Yeah.
And you weren't allowed to eat the chip dip unless you were talking about the sermon. Well, guess what? If you didn't go to church, you didn't know what the sermon was about. You didn't know what the sermon was about. No chip dip.
Oh, that's a true Christian mother right there.
Yeah, right there, right? Oh, you want the chip dip? Let's talk about the sermon.
Yeah,
that was what she did, and it was a beautiful thing. Beautiful thing. So yeah.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah.
So remembering the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, just this idea of just making sure you set aside your time. And by the way, we talked about how it had to be the Lord's day. It doesn't, right? There's no set. We're not saying, look, if you want to make it Wednesday, make it Wednesday.
Yeah.
You want to make it Saturday, make it Saturday. The important thing is not what specific day it is.
Yeah.
And the important things is not to count to see how many steps you've taken or how many, no. The important thing is to set aside that time to dedicate it to the Lord.
Yeah. Which, by the way, you can come on Wednesday nights to
you
our
can,
church
in
if
fact,
you want to. We have a service.
We have a service Wednesday night, 5:30. Confirmation, everything starts afterwards. It's awesome. It's a great time. Just come join us.
Yeah.
5:30.
You can be there all day if you want.
You could be there all day.
If you want to join the praise band, we have practice after that. So,
and I'm in the church office in the morning. So, you can be there all day with me.
Yeah.
So,
well, is there anything else to that one, or do we need?
No, that's it for now.
All right. Well, then
we're just going to keep on trekking down the commandments. I like the commandments.
Yeah, they're great. They're okay.
Yeah,
say they're all right. I'll take them. So now we got to get to church chatter. Yeah,
we got to get to church chatter. No, actually, very much excitement at the church. We got a lot of exciting things going on. Of course, again, just kind of highlight everything is done. I had another person ask me today, is the flooring all done? I'm like, yep, the flooring is all done. The pews are all done. Man, the trustees are just fantastic. I hope they get a little bit of a rest. Of course, I know a lot of them are farmers, and guess what? It's almost harvest season.
Yeah, it is almost harvest season.
It's almost harvest season. And so we got a couple things coming up. One is Consecration Sunday, which comes up not this Sunday, but next Sunday. Now, Consecration Sunday is one that usually gets it's our stewardship week. It's our stewardship kind of Sunday. And I think one of the things that the stewardship committee and I have really worked hard on, and of course we had to kind of take a break with the pandemic because we couldn't have food and yada, yada, yada. But we really want people to see stewardship not – I think a lot of churches do this where they look at stewardship like it's the law. Like, how much did you give? How much did you give? And the stewardship committee and I have really worked hard to make it not so much how much did you give. That's a part of it, but we wanted to make it a joyous thing.
Yeah.
And I think the reason that we started doing Consecration Sunday and we added a meal to it and we did all this, this kind of estimate of giving cards and all this kind of stuff is because we want it to be something that people kind of look forward to year after year. And we wanted to make it something that was very positive in nature, not something that was negative. there is that kind of element where we say, we're gonna ask people, and we do this every year. We ask people to reflect on how much that they have given to the church over this past year. But it's not. I don't want it to be an accusatory thing. It's one of those things where I want you to be reflective about it. I don't like the term tithing. Mm-hmm. I'll be upfront about that. And the reason for that is because I think if we go that route, we're going to get into Old Testament law. And Old Testament law is a lot more than just a 10% tithe. The 10% was very good because it was this idea of, 10% hurts, but it doesn't break you. And therefore, it's a good way to kind of do a litmus test. Are you worshiping God or are you worshiping money? Mm-hmm. But I don't like the idea of a tithe because I don't think, because again, that's adding a number, a tally to it, that's making it a legalistic thing.
Yeah.
And I believe the Christian should be a joyful giver. They should be able to say, hey, look, this is my church. I'm going to support my church.
Right.
And I'm doing this out of my love of God. And that's what I want it to be. And that's what, we've tried to work on it. I mean, again, you can't do that without talking about money to some regard.
Right.
You do have to do it. We do ask that you reflect upon, your own giving. Because to be honest with you, a lot of people just don't. And again, I don't want to see this as some kind of legalistic thing. And again, whenever you get to money, it doesn't matter. Like somebody is going to find a way to make that into a legalistic thing, no matter what. Yeah. But I'd also say this, and this is something I've brought up a few times in the past as well. It's like, I read a book years and years ago. It's called Move, and it was about this big like kind of survey kind of thing they did all across churches, kind of trying to measure growth in faith. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that most people wrote on the survey, it was in fact one of the top 5, I think it was like number 3 or 4, top 5 things that helped them grow in their faith was actually giving to the church.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was just the one thing that like all pastors are afraid to talk about is like one of the big things that can help you grow in your faith.
Well, it's a pretty substantial, if that's the right word. I shouldn't use big words I really don't understand. Pretty substantial investment, not money-wise, but like as you as a person. It's like you're giving a lot, you're giving a lot of yourself. You should probably you probably want to go to church then if you're giving that money,
Oh, yeah, that's true.
It's the same way. I mean, I can relate that I've taught lessons a long time, and most of the time when people try to say like, well, we don't really want to buy an instrument at the start, we want to see if they get into it, pretty much 9 times out of 10 they quit because they don't have any sort of investment in it. And even though money isn't really the main thing they should be playing, but it's just if they don't have an investment, it's like, well, who cares if they practice? Yeah, it didn't cost us anything.
Yeah.
And then they're just done. So I mean, I can see where money or giving is can be like, well, man, I need to go to church.
Yeah.
I'm given to this place, and maybe I should go and get something out of it.
But I think the other thing though too is I don't think, and again, I just don't want to see it as a legalistic thing. I think I think for me that's always the big thing. I understand what I mean, but how to convey that in a way that, again, is not offensive. Because, again, I don't want to make it sound like we're hunting people down and going, where's the money?
Right.
That's not what we as a church are trying to do. That's not what we want to do. And that's not what the stewardship committee. In fact, that's always the thing with the stewardship committee. The stewardship committee is a lot of times laced with giving, time, talents, treasures. But you realize, whenever I go to a stewardship committee, it is a theological committee. That is to say, we don't spend our time looking at spreadsheets.
Yeah.
That's other people. We talk about the theology of the church and the theology of giving. Mm-hmm. And we also talk about giving time and talents. And, we just had this whole mission funds that we kind of voted on as a church. And we just kind of, again, we just met tonight. And so we were talking about other things going on and things that we as a committee can do in terms of outreach and reach. It's a very much a theology-driven committee that is not necessarily focused on numbers. I mean, I'm not saying that some of those people in the committee might be, that maybe they are focused on, but they're not in the committee. Mm-hmm. When we meet, that's not our purpose. But anyway, Consecration Sunday is coming up. We're going to be talking about that on Sunday's worship. You can RSVP for the meal.
Ooh.
Yes. So not this Sunday, but next Sunday.
Next Sunday, okay.
Get ready.
Get ready.
Now, I will say this. This is going to be the sad thing that everybody's going to boo. But we are unable to have the big German feast this year. Now, that's see.
I know that's a big deal to people.
It is. It is a big deal. But we can't do it this year. So we are going to do, I'm trying to think. I want to think it's like fried chicken or something. But like,
yeah,
I think it's fried chicken. It'll still be good. It's still going to be great. But we'll be looking forward next year, hopefully, to have the return of the big German fest.
Yes.
Because I love, and you know, whenever we do those, whenever we're able to do those, man, it's the best German food. It is just the best. It is
good. I mean,
it's fantastic.
It's pretty good, yeah.
But again, it's a joyous thing, a thing that we should look forward to, that we want to look forward to, and that's the thing that we've kind of moved. So we got that coming up.
Mm-hmm.
We have LWML Sunday coming up. I think it's, October 14th, 15th, that Sunday. And so we're definitely looking forward to that one as well.
Mm-hmm.
And the LWML, that's the Lutheran Women in Missionary League.
Yes.
That comes up every year where we kind of celebrate the women in mission. It's a big organization, but there's also several factions in the church. We have two of them, actually. I think we have the Epiphany Society and the Rebecca Circle.
Yes, yeah.
The Rebecca Circle, I believe, meets Thursday evenings. I want to say, does it? I don't. We'll have to look at the church calendar to find out exactly. Yeah. I think it's like the first or second week of the month, the Thursday. The ladies meet, and the Epiphany Society meets the first Thursday of the month, but they meet at like 1 p.m. downstairs. So we have some LWL, but it's always cool because they always do some really cool stuff. They got you better like purple.
I was gonna say wear your purple.
I gotta wear my purple shirt and tie.
I always try to when if I remember. You guys just have so many Sundays. See, and we've talked about this before. You just have so many Sundays of like specific things, and it's like I show up sometimes. It's like, oh, it's a what Sunday? Okay. Oh shoot, I should have worn this or that. Yeah.
And then the only other thing that we got coming up is, of course, toward the end of the month of October. So I'm going to be talking about this one for a while. Actually, I shouldn't say the only thing. We have something else coming up in really early November, but I'll hold off a little bit on that one. But we have our annual Harvest Fest that we do.
Yeah.
The Harvest Fest that takes place at the end of second service.
Mm-hmm.
And it's great. I love the Fall Festival. We make our own cider. We make butter. We decorate pumpkins. It's just great.
And isn't that the one where usually some people bring some tractors and stuff?
Yeah. We get tractors going on. Oh, man. It is just so much. It's just awesome.
This podcast is good because, to be honest with you, it happens pretty much every year that I will show up and they'll be like, hey, we're having, you should have your family come. And I'm like, I didn't know we were doing this, and I didn't know it was today. And then it's like, it's kind of hard to call them up and be like, okay, let's get everybody,
Yeah.
So, yeah.
See, now you'll know.
Good. Now I know.
So again, all the meetings actually met tonight. So we talked about all these things, and like we got a concert coming up on November 4th. Look forward to finding out more about that. But that's kind of coming up too. But yeah, so we got lots of cool stuff coming up.
Yeah.
Into September, October. Oh, I love October. It's so busy, but man, do I love October. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's exciting. That's awesome.
Well, I think that does mean that marks the end of our show. Sad day. So until next week. God's blessings to all of you, and we'll see you around. See you in church.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.